Greetings, Zimbabwe, Africa, and the world. Welcome to In Conversation with Trevor, brought to you by HSTV. I go beyond the headlines and beyond the sensational. Today, I'm in conversation with Jeff Nyarota, award-winning investigative journalist, author, and media consultant. Enjoy this conversation. Jeff Nyarota, welcome to In Conversation with Trevor. I'm so glad that I finally, we created the time for us to sit down and chat. We've been meaning to do this. A lot of things happened in between, but finally, thank God we get to talk.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Trevor Ngube.
Thank you.
It took a long time for us to sit down.
Absolutely. Interestingly that you say Trevor Ngube, because you and I worked together.
Yes.
And one thing that you taught me, I don't know if you still remember this, was if you're answering the phone, you must always say, Trevor Ngube speaking, how can I help you? Your full name. And I haven't stopped doing that. So thank you for that.
You're most welcome.
Jeff, when an objective history of this country is written, your name as an investigative journalist is going to be up there, and Willowgate and the Sandura Commission are going to be up there, and the whole, we're talking about corruption. So I want us to start on Willowgate, the story, the fallout, the lessons from that whole experience, and the lessons for investigative journalists. Talk to us about the story. What was the story about? What happened?
Thank you. I think that sounds like a penalty kick for me.
Right.
But let me start by expressing our very sincere condolences on the passing away of your parents recently.
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you, Jeff.
Now, Willowgate, the story. Willowgate, the story, started in very mysterious circumstances. The mystery being that a one-time friend of mine, we are still friends in spirit, but we hardly ever meet because we now occupy different stations in life. I'm talking here of Honorable Obed Mpofu, who at the material time was the general manager of the Zimbabwe Grain Bag Company, which had just been established by ZANU-PF in Bulawayo in anticipation of a massive harvest at the time, that year. Now, Obed Mpofu received a check from Willowvale Motors here in Harare, which he wasn't expecting. He had no business receiving a check from Willowvale. So he inquired about this check, but was not quite happy with the explanation that he received. Obed, as I said, was my friend. He used to work for Zimbabwe newspapers on the management side at Herald House. So we maintained a friendship. So he came to see me in my office as editor of the Chronicle. And he was holding this mysterious check in hand. He says, look, I've received a check for so much from Willowvale Motors, and I'm failing to understand the circumstances in which this check was issued to me. So naturally, I became very interested. That's how Willowgate started.
Wow.
Now, I appropriated the check from its owner and proceeded to investigate the circumstances of it.
Do you remember how much it was for?
It was
It's
something like
irrelevant.
it was something like 2,000.
Okay.
Which in those days
Was a lot of
Trevor,
money.
was a lot of money. Now the issue was that somebody purchased a vehicle from Willowville. Now they didn't have the model. I think it was a Mazda B22. They didn't have the model available at the time. So they allocated a Mazda B18, which was cheaper by the amount reflected on the check. So it was a refund
Okay.
for the extra payment. Now, but Obetu Mpofu had not acquired the said vehicle, which is where the mystery now started to.
Yeah.
Now, there was another Mpofu in Bulawayo. I don't remember his first name now. But he was the one who had purchased the vehicle from
Willowville.
In normal circumstances, this Mpofu, this other Mpofu, would not in any circumstances be in a position to purchase a brand new Mazda B22 from Willowville. That was not his station in life. Now, that's where the story started.
The story begins, yeah?
Right. So, he had been assigned by other people to purchase and collect this vehicle on their behalf. Now, these other people were one Mahanla Naran, top business executive in Bulawayo. He ran a thriving liquor supermarket. A thriving liquor. It was not a supermarket. But to cut a long story short, he was the one who purchased the vehicle.
Right.
But he sent the other, Alvord Mpofu was the name, Alvord Mpofu, to purchase and collect the vehicle. Now, to facilitate this transaction, Naran gave the required amount to Alvord Mpofu in cash, who took it to the Bank of Credit and Commerce so that they would issue him with a check to take to Harare, which Alvord Mpofu did, and he paid for the required vehicle. But as I explained, they didn't have the
right car.
That's how the Willowgate scandal started. Now, I went to the bank when I started to smell a dead rat and inquired about the circumstances of the purchase of this vehicle. Now, the bank manager, Mr. Akhtar of the Bank of Credit and Commerce, which you guys used to call the Bank of something and Thieves.
Yeah. It was called, yeah?
Yeah. He was not amused by my line of questioning. But he cleared himself. He says, look, is it any of your business if a customer of mine brings in cash and I issue him with a check? Well, I considered that this was normally not my business. But in this case, I suspected that this had become my business. Because no sooner had I left Mr. Akhtar's office than he put a call through to Mr. Naran to say the editor of the Chronicle was here making inquiries about your check. Well, Mr. Naran, in turn, was not amused. So he calls me, and he's really upset. And he starts threatening me. He says that, I didn't mention that Mr. Naran was the biggest advertiser in the Chronicle at the material time. So he says, look, if you insist on this line of questioning about my affairs, I will do the only reasonable thing, which is cancel my contract with your paper. This was a big threat because Mr. Naran used to sign 6 months contracts. And that's a lot of money, as you know. Of course. Anyway, that's how the story started. And it started. Now, Mr. Naran had been assisted by the Minister of Commerce and Industry, the late Callistus Dingiswayo Ndlovu. That ministry was responsible for Willowvale. And so Honorable Ndlovu sat in a very cushy position, influential position, in terms of allocation of vehicles to the favored ones, which refer to the government ministers, following a decision by the government, by cabinet, that cabinet ministers must be granted precedence in securing much needed vehicles so that, to quote their words, they could visit their constituencies. This happened to start with. But the ministers, instead of visiting their constituencies, they pounced on a more profitable alternative, which was to buy these vehicles and sell them on the black market. And in no time, a lot of President Mugabe's honorable ministers had become reputable car dealers. That was the story which we investigated and exposed, resulting in the president establishing the Sandura Commission and witnessing a number of his closest allies being humiliated in front of the public. This was quite an unprecedented experience. People could not believe, those that went to the High Court where the Sandura Commission held its hearings, seeing the high and the mighty being reduced to ordinary levels.
For cars?
For cars. Resulting in a number of them, 5 ministers, including Minister Ndlovu, Minister Nkala, Minister Frederick Shawa, now Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister Zingai Mtumbuka, then of Education, now living in Maryland, in the
Washington,
States,
the US,
in Washington, yes. And the now late Minister
Maurice
Nyagumbo,
committing suicide,
who unfortunately proceeded to commit suicide. Very sad day for me, because unknown to you and others, Maurice Nyagumbo was actually my in-law, because his brother married my aunt.
Oh.
So it was a very painful experience for me that this happened.
Wow. Jeff, when you, I mean, I remember there were attempts to intimidate you, to humiliate you. I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, but Innocent Nkala saying, little Jeff Nyarota, what can little Jeff Nyarota do to me? And also President Robert Mugabe becoming edgy about your role. I mean, you ended up being promoted to head office. Talk to me, Jeff, about that whole experience. When you look back now, at what you endured, when you look back now at the fallout and where we are now as a nation, talking about corruption, do you feel, what goes through your mind?
Let me start by saying I made reference to the late Maurice Tafumani Nyagumbo. I always say that wherever he is, Minister Maurice Nyagumbo must look down on us with much regret. To think that he lost his life, he cut his life short on account of a Toyota Cressida. Okay, it was the luxury car of Zimbabwe at that time. But these days, that pales into total insignificance in comparison to what the corrupt guys of the day are up to. I'm not saying that anybody who imports a Rolls Royce is corrupt, but I am suggesting that among them must be some who can't really account for the sources of their wealth if they were asked to. In fact, I'm waiting for the day when ZAC will put into action a promise that it has since made, that a day will soon come when they will be called to account. And I'm sure there will be gnashing of teeth there if ZAC is really serious. But we go back to Enos Nkala and the then president. You see, in the mid-1980s, Trevor, you know that yourself, our ministers had become larger than life. They were beyond control of anybody, least of all of the president of the country. They were a power unto themselves. Enos Nkala, for instance, did not believe he was accountable to anybody, let alone a newspaper editor. As you just mentioned, I had the indignity, the pain of hearing myself being referred to as Little Nyarota. You know, it's become my lifetime joke. When I'm introduced to people who remember the incident you referred to, they always look me up and down. They say, but Nkala said you were little. So I say, maybe I was little then. But that was one of the humorous aspects of that scandal. But Nkala was really upset, and he couldn't understand, and this appeared to be genuine, why a journalist would ask him to explain what he did with his car. I have a video of him speaking on ZTV on that issue, which I watch about every 2-3 months just to...
For entertainment.
For entertainment, especially when I have visitors at home and they love it. Yeah, but the sad thing is the minister actually believed what he was saying. That you, as a journalist, as a newspaper owner, as an editor,
you are nothing.
You are nothing.
Nothing.
One day, I had occasion to bump into Minister Nkala at the trade fair. If you remember well, there used to be the Lonro, the famous Lonro Pavilion, where the late Herbert Munangatire held sway. And all the ministers relocated to Bulawayo during trade fair. and they could be easily found at Lonro. That's where they had breakfast, they had lunch, it was like an extension.
They ate from his hands.
Yes, and he became powerful on that account. Now, I had the temerity to venture there while Minister Enos Nkala was holding court. So when he saw me approaching, he said, there he is. This was before the Little Nyarota incident. So he says, there he is, Nyarota. I see you are now Zapu. Wow. And he was shouting for everybody to hear. Now, I did not want to tempt fate by daring to respond from a distance. So I approached him nicely and sat by him. They said, Minister, I'm sorry, but what is the problem? And he says, you and your editorials, you think we don't know what we're doing? You are now a ZAPU supporter. Mm. And who do you think you are anyway? So I realized that to rescue myself, I must bite the bullet, which I did. And I said to him, Minister, you know that the problem with powerful ministers such as yourself is that you never find time to understand, find out about the small people of the world, people like us. Do you really know me? So I caught him off guard. I said, Minister, if you had the time to tell you, you would be humbled by who I am. I'm not talking about newspapers. I'm talking about my past, where I have come from. You make assumptions. Now, other ministers were now listening intently, and he was just blinking his eyes, and I decided to stop there, but I had scored a point. And that was the background to his fury when a year or two later he said,
Little Nyarota.
Yes. Now, you made reference to the president.
Yeah.
When the first installment of the Willowgate scandal appeared, I was summoned to Harare by Elias Rusike, our former boss.
Our former boss, yes.
Our former boss.
Yes.
And my colleagues in Harare, I had two colleagues in Harare, professional colleagues, Tommy Stolle, editor of the Herald, and former editor of the Chronicle, and Henry Murazikwa, editor of the Sunday Mail. Now, on arrival, I was told that we were required to present ourselves at State House. The president wanted to see us. Now, somehow I suspected that this meeting
was about you, not everybody else.
Not everybody else. And my colleagues reinforced my fears on the way to State House. They said, you will be lucky to come out of State House as editor of the Chronicle. So it was with much trepidation that we entered the massive lounge of State House. And the president then came. In fact, it was not just the three of us present. It was all the media bosses, all the editors, CEOs. It was a big occasion. And I somehow knew that my friends had been correct. I had come to bid the president farewell as the editor of the Chronicle. But I say to myself, if I must fall, it must be with dignity, because I haven't done anything wrong. In fact, the president should be inviting me so that he can pat me on the back for
Job well done.
for a job well done, exactly. So eventually, the president comes in, he greets us all, and he starts talking, as was his usual custom, about
Stories.
the history of the Liberation War, about... Then suddenly, he cuts himself short, and he says, "Which one of you is Comrade Nyarota?" And I said, "It is I, Your Excellency." And that was the beginning of the drama. Excuse me. Because he wanted to know what this was all about. And this was, of course, Willowgate. So I had not come totally unprepared. So I rolled up and I told him. And I could see that I was having impact on him. He asked questions which I answered truthfully. He eventually said to me, "Comrade Nyarota, I cannot stop you from publishing your findings. But I have one small request to make to you." I said, "With due respect, Your Excellency." He says, "Please, don't publish any lies about any of my ministers." So I thought that was a fair deal.
Absolutely.
I said, "Your Excellency, I will make sure that I publish no lies about your minister." In fact, I restrained myself from saying, there are so many unpalatable truths about your ministers that it would be hardly necessary for me to publish lies at all. So we shook hands on that.
But when you left, you're no longer editor of the Chronicle, no?
I was still editor of the Chronicle.
Okay.
I was still editor of the Chronicle.
All right.
I could see that
Yes,
my
because the
Harare
stories-
colleagues,
Yeah.
who had been
Briefed otherwise.
briefed otherwise from the Ministry of Information. Well, I will not describe what I thought about their reaction, because it will not be kind. So I went back to Bulawayo, reinvigorated with the mandate
From
that
the president.
from the president.
Write the truth.
Write the truth. I'd been press secretary to the previous president, President Banana. So I was no newcomer to State House. And President Banana used to say to me, "Comrade Nyarota, you know what? It is the truth that will save our country." That's how the rest of the story then unfolded.
Tell me, Jeff, when you look at that, there's two aspects here. There's the way the government reacts to the whole thing. There's the unfortunate suicide. There's the big man politics at play. But there's also our profession as journalists. What lessons does Willowgate give us as far as investigative journalism is concerned? What's your assessment of the state of investigative journalism and journalism per se? And you were saying, you said rather that politicians were larger than life. Are they not still larger than life? Even worse than they were? Speak to me on those issues. The state
Larger
of
than life.
investigative-
Let me start with larger than life. I speak to many of the current stream of journalists, some of your guys, for instance, younger journalists. And I always say to them, "Look, you guys don't realize how quite fortunate you are." And they say, "Why?" I say, "Because we operated, we practiced our journalism in a totally different environment." Let's start with social media. Social media respects nobody. That's the point I'm making. Now,
Okay.
if a quarter of what you read on social media these days appeared in any newspaper back in the 1980s, those journalists would spend the rest of their life in jail.
Jail.
So the situation has changed. Now, you say, are ministers no longer larger than life? I don't believe they are to the same extent as Enos Nkala was. Even Mugabe himself. I mean, I regret sometimes that I'm not an active journalist anymore. I would really love to lock horns with the president of the land, say, can you please account for this? Because I think he has opened himself to such kind of confrontation with the journalists. He goes through a lot that Mugabe would never have been subjected to. And this is a positive for us,
Sure.
which maybe we are failing to
utilize,
exploit,
yeah.
to utilize, yes.
Yeah.
So, I hear journalists complain that they cannot practice their profession, but sometimes it's also, there's a bit of dramatization. I was reading with disbelief, dismay yesterday a story about a journalist who claimed to have written a story and then to have been abducted. I'm sure you saw this story.
No, I must have dismissed it, yeah.
To have been, it was one of these online reporters.
The journalist who claims to have been abducted.
To have been abducted and to have been subjected to violence or beating up by whoever. Now, yesterday, a colleague of his went public with a picture that had been taken of the abducted journalist and the one who went public, as well as 3 colleagues, while they were having a good time in a shebeen in Mbare, where a fist fight ensued for reasons that were not given, but that is the nature of shebeens. They lend themselves to such a... But the story had gone right around the world about Zimbabwe. You know, these are these situations sometimes make me regret that I'm a journalist. I don't want to be lumped together with journalists who do that to our profession, to themselves, to our country. See, they will pick on anything. I'm sorry if I sound like Nick Mangwana or George Charamba, but I'm speaking earnestly because this is my country.
Absolutely.
And
What's happened to journalism?
I
journalism
honestly
here?
don't know. What I think, Trevor, is that you could help each other here. See, our journalism training institutions are churning out a huge volume of journalists, new journalists. I call them half-baked journalists, whose training in some cases is dubious, whose chances therefore of securing a good job at AMH are non-existent. So they become instant freelance journalists. My understanding of freelance journalists is that people like you and I, experienced, trained, at our time of retirement, then become
freelance journalists.
Robin Drew, the last white editor of the Herald, became a well-known freelance journalist in Harare. He was my editor when I joined the Herald in 1978. Soon after independence, he became a freelance journalist. That is the nature of freelance journalism.
Freelance spoke quality, didn't it?
Yes.
It spoke experience,
Yes.
it spoke wisdom.
And yes. And when he contacts sources and he says, I am so-and-so, former editor of the Herald, they immediately
recognize
him, recognize his authority. And they interact with him accordingly. Now, if a dropout from some journalism training program who has become an instant freelance journalist calls you, starts asking you questions about your operations here, surely you'll be forgiven.
I don't take the call.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you know what they do? They will write about you nevertheless.
Oh yes, yes. They don't.
If
they don't
you
bother.
say to them, no, look, I didn't do this. I was in London on that day. Here is my passport. They will still write the story and say, but he showed us his passport to say he was in London on that day. So they will not allow the truth
to stand in the way,
of their school.
Which is sad, really, because it means that our profession, which is the fourth estate, we're the fourth estate,
Yes.
am I right? Has been heavily compromised.
Yes.
I usually say, Jeff, that unless we take ourselves seriously, we shouldn't expect the public to take us seriously.
Why should they?
Yeah.
Why should Nkala take us seriously if we don't take ourselves seriously?
Absolutely.
Why should he have?
Yeah.
Why should Honorable Mnangagwa take us seriously if we don't take ourselves seriously? So that's the starting point, that we respect ourselves first.
By being professional.
By being professional.
True to the facts.
By being ethical.
Yeah, ethical.
Respecting the truth.
The truth, yeah. Jeff, you were the founding editor of the Daily News, whose printing press was bombed, whose offices were bombed. Talk to us about that experience. You were arrested 6 times, am I wrong?
Yes.
That speaks to an environment that was very hostile to freedom of expression, hostile to the jobs that you and I are supposed to do. In the first instance, who, as far as you're concerned, who was responsible for bombing the Daily News, and why would they want to bomb the Daily News? Who was responsible for bombing your offices, and why would they want to bomb your offices? Is that another penalty again?
Another penalty.
That I gave you?
But I will refrain from kicking this one. For legitimate reasons, which you will understand. Now, the first part of the question, who was responsible? Now, towards the end of 2001, at the height of the land invasions, and see, our government felt under pressure. And in those circumstances, they saw enemies all over the place. I'm sure they saw enemies even among themselves. Nobody could trust anybody anymore. And one of their worst enemies was the press. Not all press, because they had their own. The Herald, my former Chronicle. Those were the good newspapers. Not the Financial Gazette, not the new kid on the block, the Daily News. So, they viewed us as being agents of the foreign powers who wanted to exert control or who wanted to implement change of governance in Zimbabwe. Right. I speak as one. Sorry, let me start by explaining that when we started the Daily News, we agreed that we would never have anything to do with donor funding for good reasons. Because once you accept donor funding, you open yourself to accusation that whoever is funding you is capturing you. There's a lot of talk these days about media
Capture.
About media capture. So we did not take any donor funding. We appealed to individuals of like mind who had spare cash to invest in our project. But all this was scuttled when the printing press was bombed. And it was bombed, if you remember well, a few days after our former friend,
Jonathan Moyo.
Jonathan Moyo. You remember that
Yes.
Jonathan Moyo was our star columnist. He contributed to the success of our financial gazette.
Yeah.
And we became so close that I took Jonathan Moyo to my village in Nyazura one weekend, and we spent a day there by the bottle store. And you will not believe it. People were coming, greeting Jonathan Moyo and me. They would go into the bottle store and come out with 2 pints, some with 2 quarts. By the end of the day, the fridge was full of we eventually had to give them away. But I'm trying to make a point here about how we became close, because Jonathan was a crucial writer for us. But he did in about 10 somewhere. I don't know what happened. By the time we met again, Trevor, when I was editor of the Daily News, he broke no-nonsense. And nonsense by his definition. If you write a negative story about the government when he's Minister of Information, that amounts to nonsense. So, a couple of days before the end of January 2001, he issued a damning threat that he was going to deal with the Daily News. Right? Now, maybe this was coincidence, happenstance, but 2 days later, indeed, our printing press went up in smoke. But we can't accuse people on supposition without evidence. Right? But that this was an operation mounted by government or people within government is without doubt. Now, when I said I will not take this penalty kick, Trevor, I am right. I've written my 3rd book. It's called The Journalist as an Outcast. And while conducting investigations for material to put together in this book, I mounted an investigation into who bombed the Daily News. So in this forthcoming book, I will not give you a sneak preview in your...
It's in there. I look forward to reading that.
It's in there.
Yeah.
Names, circumstances. Unfortunately, Trevor, 2 of them are now dead.
Oh.
Especially the director of the whole operation, who was a CIO guy, top CIO, who drove to our printing press and directed this whole operation. I have his name and his colleagues in the forthcoming book.
We look forward to reading that book. Clearly, you had become... So go ahead, Jeff. Go ahead.
I took the precaution, just in case somebody decides to silence me and my book, to place it in the care of my very good lawyer, so that if anything happens to me, the book will still come out. You remember the late Honorable Nkala said he had written a book, but he only wanted it to be published after his death. But I'm not doing the same as the the former minister. The book it's written. It's been written for some time, and it will reveal who bombed the Daily News.
You had become a pain on the side of ZANU-PF and the government. I mean, the bombing of the Daily News printing press, and then your offices. You grew the Daily News from nothing to becoming bigger than the state-controlled Herald. In your view, what explained that success?
It's a very simple story, Trevor. The runaway success of the Daily News was due to the tight control that the Mugabe government exerted on the Zim papers stable, because they were not free to publish anything. You may remember, Trevor, that when we were at the Financial Gazette, there was one incident involving a demonstration which went on for a week involving school teachers. You may remember that.
Yes, I do.
It went on for a week. Teachers would assemble in Africa Unity Square every morning, and they would chant, sing all day long until the end of the day. Started on Monday. There was no story in the Herald, just across the road. Tuesday, no story in the Herald. Wednesday, no story in the Herald. Thursday, what day were we coming out? Because
Thursday.
we changed from one day to the other. I'm not sure.
We're coming on Thursday, hey?
Thursday.
Yeah.
Eventually, that story appeared in the Financial Gazette. A weekly. And if you remember, who wrote this story? The guys in Herald House.
Wow.
Because they were tired of wiping the tear gas from their eyes. But this did not motivate them. The tear gas did not motivate them to write what they were witnessing just across the road. So in frustration, they gave the story to us.
Yeah.
It's very sad, but I'm trying to explain what led to the success of the Daily News. Now, Minister Victoria Chitepo had issued an instruction that the story should not be covered. The instruction obviously went to Zim papers. So they acted accordingly
to instruction.
and did not see no evil, did not hear any evil, or did not...
Do you think the situation is still the same?
I'm coming to that. So that was the background. By the time the Daily News appeared on the streets, people were fed up with this kind of coverage, where they see events happening, then witnessing events, being eyewitnesses to events, makes people buy newspapers for the detail and the background the following day, and there's nothing. Right. So there was a genuine hunger, genuine thirst for information about events in the lives or surrounding the people of Zimbabwe. So when we announced that we were introducing a new paper, there was panic at various levels because they associated the people involved with journalism that had to do with investigation and exposure of wrongdoing. When the paper arrived, predictably, it sold like hot cakes from day one. When we launched, the Herald was printing and receiving returns on 165,000 copies per day. We started modestly around 30,000, but by the end of our first year on the streets, we printed and sold 129,500 copies, which were all sold. By that time, the Herald had been reduced to a modest 50,000. So I'm trying to explain
Sure.
the expectation that government control had generated among newspaper readers. These days, I know we say because of social media and online publications, our newspapers can no longer sell that many newspapers. Yes, that makes sense, but I always say that my favorite of your papers is Newsday, for obvious reasons. It is available. If Newsday has a front page headline, Mnangagwa's Swiss accounts, all the details, it can sell 100,000. It can print and sell 100,000. With apologies to his honorable, I'm just using him as an example.
Right.
I'm not suggesting in any way.
Right,
But
yeah.
it's a good example
Yeah.
to illustrate the point that
Absolutely.
it's what appears on your front that sells newspapers.
It's the content.
Yeah, we tend to give away space to social media, which we have already agreed is run by people of
Dubious character.
right. So there's a contradiction somewhere.
The Daily News was launched 2000, eh? It's 2000?
1990.
1999.
April
So we're talking about the
1990.
year 2000.
Yeah,
eh?
we're talking about the year
2020, yeah.
2000.
2000.
Yeah.
Okay. Jeff, when you were at the at the Chronicle, this has been an issue that people have been debating. That Jeff Nyarota and the Chronicle, your views on Gukurahundi, that you didn't speak up against Gukurahundi. Yes, I think you've written in your book, there's a chapter against the grain, but there's a view that once you're editor of the Chronicle did not expose what is happening with Gukurahundi. What's your response to that?
That's another penalty. This time, I will take it. Now, my friend Trevor, this view which you are elaborating now is a view of limited historical value. This story about what Jeff Nyarota could have done during Gukurahundi is an issue that was non-existent at the material time. I never heard it. I know when it started, I'll kick the ball. It was never there until I lived in Bulawayo for a year or so after the signing of the Unity Agreement signifying the end of Gukurahundi. Up to my departure at the end of '88, nobody ever said this about me or anyone else in the media. That's my starting point.
Sure.
Now, why did the people of Bulawayo and Matebeleland at the material time never say this? Point one. Having left Bulawayo on promotion, according to President Mugabe, to the previously non-existent post of Group Public Relations Executive in Harare, we launched ANZ in 1998. Our first project as ANZ was a weekly paper called the Chitungwiza Express. The second project was the Bulawayo Dispatch, and it is the dispatch that I want to refer to.
Right.
I went back to Bulawayo to launch a newspaper for Bulawayo, the Dispatch. There was an official opening Those that we invited came, but the people bought, and it was snatched, sold out. Nobody ever said, you know who is coming back with this paper? Is that Jeff Nyarota? No, nothing of the sort. In due course, I came back again to Bulawayo with the Daily News. And all hell literally broke loose as the people of Bulawayo rushed to buy the Daily News, knowing full well who was behind it. The same person who had not acted professionally at the Chronicle, myself. Nobody ever said anything. Right. To me, these instances are meaningful. In 2014, I was appointed by our former friend, Jonathan Moyo,
Right.
as chairman
Of IMPI.
of IMPI. Now, the IMPI project took us all over the country, including Bulawayo. We had a meeting in the large city hall. It was packed with people. I made a presentation there. Somebody raised his hand after my presentation. Mr. Nyarota, why don't you come back to the Chronicle? We're tired of this nonsense. And there was applause. I felt honored. The following day, we went to Nkulumane. There was another meeting there. And as if on cue, somebody else asked the same question. Mr. Nyarota, why don't you come back to Bulawayo? I said, for what? Said, take charge of the Chronicle again. It's gone astray. Right. I'm only giving you this instance by way of background. Now, here's what happened. There was no issue about Gukura Wundi from the time I was in Bulawayo until when I was fired by CMC Paper Nkomo from the Daily News. And I relocated to the States. Now, you may want to know that, see, you put a ball in front of me, and I'm a man of honor, I always speak the truth. When we set up the Daily News, we set up an office in Bulawayo, and we picked up on one bright young lad who was not a trained journalist, but he had an eye for news. His name was Mduduzi Matutu. In due course, we brought Mduduzi to Harare, to head office, to train under our training editor, the illustrious but now late William Bango. And everybody should have lived happily ever after. But no. One day I'm flying to London and I meet in the departure lounge my most junior reporter, Mduduzi Matutu, carrying a bag. Say, oh, Comrade Matutu, where are you off to? So he says, to London. See, but in what circumstances, Mduduzi? I'm your editor. I have no idea of you going off duty, least of all to a distant place. He says, oh, Mr. Nkomo arranged this trip for me. It's a training program. Trevor, you are a newspaper man. So this underling has been, even you sitting here today cannot do that to the editor of
Newsday.
Of Newsday.
Zimbabwe Independent.
The Standard.
So the CEO has spoken to...
So the CEO has made this private arrangement with a young reporter from his part of the country. I'm not trying to be tribal here, but I'm stating facts.
Yeah.
So anyway, I can't stop him. So we fly together to London and we bid each other farewell. I come back, then Paper fires me, and that is also history. But in due course, while Paper was doing this, I was busy winning awards at the Daily News. By the time I eventually left, I'd received no less than 9 international awards. I didn't count the local ones, right? So I am no longer the Jeff Nyarota of the Chronicle. I am somebody else now. Internationals, men of international stature, multiple awards. And, you know, I always say that if I was to start all over again, I would never want to win an award for journalism.
Why, Jeff?
It creates enemies. Yeah, there must be a cut-off point to make everybody happy. So by the time I'm in the States, Mduduzi is now in London and is working on starting a new paper of his own. Now I'm working my story backwards. Now, I can assure you, if I want to start a paper today or tomorrow, I can do so. I can go to any donors to say, look, I want to do a story on a paper that focuses on Gukurahundi. I'll come back with money, I tell you. This has been happening, Trevor.
Interesting.
This has been, and I fell victim. In due course, I have Mduduzi in London, Jonathan in Harare. What rescued me was the 6,000-kilometer distance to Boston. Otherwise, I don't know whether I will still be sitting before you today. Now, they start talking about Gukurahundi. The Chronicle did not report Gukurahundi properly. This is because they want their own paper to get funding under the guise of seeking to report Gukurahundi properly.
Yeah.
Now, as God would have it, in due course, Jonathan appoints Mduduzi as editor of the same Chronicle. We still anxiously await the appropriate coverage. Now, to come back, Trevor, this is my first book, Against the Grain. I have a chapter in here in which I deal with Gukurahundi. Unfortunately, this book was never sold in Zimbabwe. It was produced in Cape Town and sold and marketed from South Africa, but they never sent it here. So people don't, I wrote this for my compatriots, but they don't know what I wrote. So I'm having
a reprint.
Yeah, it's now well advanced. Okay. It will soon be available.
Look forward to
right. I tried my best. I'm an honest man, you know me. I'll never lie in print.
So let's move to an interesting part of your life. You decide to talk to us about your decision to join politics. What went through your mind? What then happened after you decided to go into politics?
My decision to go into politics,
yes,
Trevor, was not actually my decision. It was a decision made by the people of Makoni, my home area, my constituency,
right,
and thrust upon me protesting for 2 years, 3 years. When I came back from the States, Makoni constituency, Makoni South, had a member of parliament, one Honorable Pishai Muchauraya. Contrary to public opinion, we become quite friendly despite our our volatile past. Now, Muchauraya has, for reasons shared with me, made himself unpopular with the people. To start with, he is from Chipinge. He is not from Makoni. But in what happened in 2008 election, when he was elected, no one in Makoni constituency had the guts to challenge ZANU-PF. No one. So what does the MDC do in those circumstances? It goes outside the constituency and spots Pishai Muchauraya in Rusape, where he lived. So they talk, and he agrees to stand for election in Makoni. See, Now, by the time I am back, as I said, things have not gone as well as had been expected, and he has become somewhat unpopular. So when the people hear that I've come back and I've been treated badly at my former paper, at the Daily News, they've kicked me out for the second time. See, I deserve a mention in the Guinness Book of Records as the editor who was fired four times.
Twice by one
including
publication.
twice by one publication. And all this happened while all his papers were on the rise. Right, but that's an aside.
It's a big one.
Now, my people, they see me there. I've been kicked out again. Meanwhile, they have a problem MP. So they add one and one. I say, maybe this is God arranging this for us. Our son has come back. Let's have him as our MP. That's how I went in. So I refused. I said, look, I am in the process of starting my own company, Buffalo Media Publishing Company. And I can't do two things at the same time. Now, I launched Buffalo Media in the assumption that the money that I'd won at the Daily News in court, the 92,000 would come, and I would invest it in
The project.
The project. But things did not go that way. By 2013, I had no option but to sit down with the people of my
Constituency.
That's how I went into politics, reluctantly.
Do you have any regrets for going into politics?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It was a valuable learning. I learned a lot of things. To start with, I assumed that I would have an easy passage through the election on the basis of massive support from my colleagues in the media.
Name recognition and everything else, zilch.
Zero. In fact, they started to write falsehoods about me, starting with my own earlier paper, the Manica Post. And all newspapers, not one of them ever came to me to say, can we talk to you? But they talked to my rival. All right. That's the story about how I now this venture, my brief venture into politics, culminated in the incident where I was cheated by my own party, the MDC Trangirai, the party that I stood for in the election. They cheated me in broad daylight. People cried when they saw what happened that day at the primary election.
Your own party didn't want you to be their candidate.
They didn't. See, I was wanted in the village.
By the people.
Not at Harvest House. You put it nicely.
Yeah.
That was my predicament.
Yeah. Well, so right there, Jeff, what's your sense of our politics? What's your sense of opposition politics in Zimbabwe at the present moment? I mean, the people of Makoni want you as a member of, as their member of parliament, but your party at Harvest House doesn't think that you must come in. What does that say?
The difference here, Trevor, you ask a very pertinent question. The difference here is that the people of Makoni have an honest, a sincere evaluation of me. The people at Harvest House have various ways of looking at you. As a rival, you know, politics is all about rival. Maybe if you win as an MP, maybe Trangirai will have a softer spot for you. And even Trangirai himself may look at you askance. So,
Wow.
yeah. I will not go into that, but that is also...
So meritocracy is not the issue.
Meritocracy is not the issue
At Harvest House.
at Harvest House. Or at
ZANU-PF headquarters.
At ZANU-PF headquarters. That is why in in our elections, by election day, there are so many independent candidates in both ZANU-PF and in the MDC. This is because ZANU headquarters throws in a candidate, while the constituency throws in its own candidate. I had occasion to say to my colleagues in the MDC, because they used to think that anybody coming in this late towards election must be a CIO.
Opportunist.
Not opportunist. ZANU-PF sponsored, but ZANU-PF and CIO boils down to the same thing. And I used to say to them, colleagues, there's something that you don't appreciate. You look with suspicion at anybody who dares to align himself or herself with you towards election time. You say there must be spies or CIO. How do you know that you embraced spies and CIO back in 1999 and they are there now fully fledged and enjoying the benefit?
Did that experience change your view of MDC?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
Is that sufficient?
In what way?
I had no idea that, see, this experience provided me with a window into
MDC,
into politics, especially opposition politics. See, and when I walked out, it was some sense of resignation. That so these people are expecting to replace ZANU-PF. And this is what they do to each other. In other words, to themselves.
That's amazing, that.
Right. And ZANU-PF is watching all the time. See, there is some perception that ZANU-PF is waiting for the opposition to remove them. Nothing could be further from the truth than that. No. They didn't build that headquarters so that they would abandon it one day in favor of abdicating to a rival party. So, but that's not mean that they cannot be replaced, but they can only be replaced through appropriate strategy with mature politicians. I always say politics is all about maturity. This business of youngsters graduating from women's university or
Faculty of Law,
from NAST, Faculty of Law, and immediately they are into politics. And sometimes they win. And in their first speech in Parliament, they are demanding keys for their car. They've never driven a car of their own, mind you. They've never carried a briefcase to work. And suddenly they believe they have all the answers for the problems that bedevil our country.
Let me move you to another aspect of your life. You and our good friend Jonathan Moyo get to meet in 2015. Is it 2015? And you are appointed to chair the Information and Media Panel of Inquiry. You produced a 666-page report.
Yes.
Tell me, I mean, not going into details of what the reports say, were you disappointed? What's your sense? Were the 666 recommendations ever implemented? Did you ever think they would be ever implemented?
If I was ever disappointed in my life outside journalism, it was in 2015, in the aftermath of our presentation of the IMPI report to the Ministry of Information. By the time we got to printing that report, the ministry had run out of money. They were allocated $1.5 million for that project, which was subsequently increased to $2.1 million for that project. By the time I wanted money to print the report, the coffers were empty. They were not even paying us some of our allowances, not paying for our fuel. The money had gone.
Where
Right.
to? Where to?
Where money usually goes. In the circumstances that are not quite visible. Right. I had to fundraise for the printing. I raised $25,000 for the printing. Now, I'm mentioning this as a prelude to saying, after we submitted our report, we then shook hands and I bade them farewell. Our office was in Mazowe Street. I had the occasion to visit there a couple of months later, and I peeped into my old office, and all the copies were there. None had been distributed. I talked about disappointment.
Yeah.
So, what was this all about?
Answer the question, Jeff. What was this all about?
Let me say, as chairman of IMPI, I was entitled to a very nice car, a Toyota Land Cruiser Prado. My deputy was entitled to a similar car. So, in due course, we saw two Toyota Land Cruiser Prados delivered outside our offices. And my secretary and staff said, "Oh, Mr. Nyarota, your cars." So there was jubilation, including in my heart. Later in the day, the cars were not there. So our collective assumption was that they had gone for fueling, CMED. By the end of the day, the cars were not back. Well, maybe they took their time at CMED, maybe there was paperwork to be completed. The following morning, the cars were not there. By the end of the day, the cars were not there. Third day, by the end of the day, the cars were not there. So I started inquiring. Now, I had made lots of friends at Ministry of Information by the time I departed. So they say, "Mr. Nyarota, your cars have been allocated to Comrade Minister and Comrade Permanent Secretary. They are no longer your cars. As for you, there is a Isuzu twin cab." Well, an Isuzu twin cab is quite a nice car. It's a good car. Yeah. I wish our government ministers knew that. They would save us a lot of money. So I took the keys for my Isuzu twin cab and lived happily for the duration of the project. But the point is, I was used. This is my view now. This project was used for purposes of acquisition. I can tell you here that we bought 11 Isuzu twin cab trucks, including mine, for the project. They went right around the country at the beginning. We traveled, Trevor, covered every part of the country. But the more we traveled, the less the area to be covered diminished. The more the area to be covered diminished. So that towards the end, the vehicles were sitting there. But before that end, our vehicles had been reassigned to a new project.
Wow.
My Grace Mugabe's Meet the People tours.
Did you ever, let me say this, Jeff, do you think you were naive? Did you ever think that Jonathan Moyo and George Chiramba would do anything with the 666-page report that you guys produced? Is that a fair question?
It is a fair question. But when we were working on our project, the countenances of Jonathan Moyo and George Charamba had receded to the periphery. We were seized with the task in
The
hand.
assignment.
And we were not always thinking of George. Or what is Charamba going to do with this? No. We're just doing an honest job. We're being paid quite nicely, by the way. So we owed the ministry a good job, and we gave them a good report. It is there. And I remember we had a meeting called by the ministry in Nyanga thereafter. And some of the chairmen of the various sections of the report were invited, and they made presentations. One of them is Dr. Namo Miripiri of the University of Midlands University. He made a very sad point. He said, I don't understand why the ministry is delaying in implementation of this report. But we are already implementing its contents at the university in Gwero. Yeah.
Wow. So that report sits gathering dust.
I'm not sure, I haven't revisited, but I would not be surprised if it was there, maybe.
Jeff, we are holding you back from going to pick up your one of your 8 grandchildren. He's 8 years old. You know, I don't have grandkids yet, but I must ask you, because I hear a lot of my friends saying there's nothing as rewarding, fulfilling, as beautiful as having a grandchild. What is it like having a grandchild for Jeff Nyaruta?
Your informants are 100% correct.
Right.
You haven't started living until you've had a grandchild.
Wow. Talk to me about the experience. What is it like, Jeff?
If I was to start all over again, I would dearly wish to have a life full of grandchildren.
Oh, wow.
Perhaps without children. If that were possible. Awesome. I mean, I live for my grandchildren. The older they grow, the less accessible they become. So it's sad to see them go, but fortunately, I still have.
What a blessing. What a blessing. Jeff, you have written 2 books. 3rd one is on the way.
Another 4th one is also.
4th one is coming.
Yes.
We love books on this show, Jeff, and so the Against the Grain is your first
That's
book.
my first book, published in 2006 while I was written and published while I was in the States at Harvard.
And you're working on a reprint
of this one, yes.
Of this one, okay.
As you see, it's been read by more than 50 people. It's the only copy that I have, and it's not in the shops.
We look forward to getting it. And then this is your second book, eh?
This is my second book.
It's called The Graceless Fall of Robert Mugabe, the end of a dictator's reign.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And then the third one?
The third one is The Journalist as an Outcast.
When is that one out?
If I'm lucky, before the end of the year.
Okay.
It's about, see, The Graceless Fall is my memoirs. But I realize now that I wrote my memoirs prematurely when my life was still full of... so The Graceless Fall is my memoirs after The Graceless Fall. It's about what happened to me. Not The Graceless Fall, the Journalist as an Outcast.
Right.
Some people believe that I went through worse after I left the Daily News. I'll leave you to find out. Now, the 4th title, which is also in a stage of completion, is called The Honorable Minister.
Ah,
It is my first attempt at fiction. But I call it truthful fiction.
you're way to my appetite, and I suspect I know who the Honorable Minister is, but let me not go there. And what, I mean, apart from these, I mean, these are the ones that you've written, Jeff. What books have you read that have made a huge impact on Jeff Nyarote?
As an author, I'll answer that as an author. The book that has had the greatest impact on me was Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. Now, during my stay in the United States, I was a professor at Bard College in upstate New York. And the late Chinua Achebe was also a professor.
What a blessing.
Right. I had known about him and respected him long before I eventually met him. But being juxtaposed to him in these circumstances was a blessing.
I'm sure
to me.
it was.
And I've read the book more than a few times.
Mm-hmm. Any other book that you want to recommend apart from Things Fall Apart?
Apart from my own.
Yeah, apart from your own. Yes.
Not anymore.
Not
But I've become somewhat of a collector of books. And sometimes I feel guilty that I don't have the time to go through them. But I went through David Coulthard's
what a book.
and I like the, he dwells at considerable length on Gukura Hundi.
It does.
And he says it is difficult to trace to source the figure of 20,000. And Trevor, I think that is a statement that Zimbabweans should take seriously. Okay, we all, I have a lot of respect for David, and he wouldn't say this without cause. In fact, he says it is his opinion that the 20,000 could be traced back to the late Mdala, Joshua Nkomo. But he has since set me thinking, if there is dispute on the magnitude, on the quantum of victims of Gukura Hundi, why don't we check? Why don't we, I wanted to say head count, but that would be inappropriate. Why don't we put a project together that goes around all the affected villages, listing the names of people who disappeared?
It's a big thing.
It is a big thing.
Big thing.
Yes, I think this country needs it. Mind you, we had another war before Gukura Hundi. Thousands of people were killed during the War of Liberation. I don't hear anybody say anything about it, but I can assure you that if you go down to my village, they will tell you in 1977, Seguru Mwanandimai and his wife and their granddaughter were thrown into their house and it was set alight. They died there. If in 79, headman Matukutire was subjected to similar treatment. In the same year, Chief Rukweza was butchered in. We didn't talk about. I didn't just become a journalist.
No.
I started somewhere.
Absolutely.
I was a teacher during the War of Liberation. I saw people being killed, people that I knew. Somebody was killed while sitting next to me. Yeah. I saw people who were killed by the Rhodesian Army.
Yeah.
I was arrested, and I had the responsibility of putting order to these disboweled bodies. So I saw death during the war. But And no, there's no talk of, there's total silence. People were killed by the Rhodesian forces. People were killed by ZANLA. Not a word is said.
No. Jeff, you and I could go on and on.
And on.
Actually, we have just touched the tip of the iceberg. Your life is an inspirational story. You are a trailblazer, like I said when I started, an objective history of this country would put you right up there in terms of influencing and impacting this nation. So Jeff, I don't take lightly you're creating the time to spend with us. Thank you so much. Allow me, Jeff, to turn to our audience who are in Zimbabwe, on the continent and in the diaspora, who watch this show on a weekly basis. Remember, we come out every Monday at 7 a.m. Central African Time, and I invite you to click on this red button to subscribe. When you subscribe, you will receive an alert every time we have one of these quality conversations. But until next time, cheers to you all.